Great. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate you watching this recording and joining us live, of course, if you're ever able to do that. So today, we'll be talking about the United States retirement system, the Social Security system. And so we also have a guest speaker, Vardan, who is the former Prime Minister of Finance of the Republic of Armenia and who also worked on the pension system reform during his time in the government. And I'll let Vardan introduce himself in a little more detail once we get to his presentation. And so, Hadi, so should I start and then move
Yes,
on to
please,
you for the pay-as-you-go
please.
system? Okay, very good. So let me start by sharing my screen. So give me one moment to share the screen and to go into the presentation mode. So today we're talking about Social Security in the United States. Our plan, or at least this is the first part of our conversation. So we'll talk about the reasons why this is an important topic. Heidi will talk about the pay-as-you-go system. I'll come back and talk a little more about program structure and financing and typical pressures on Social Security and potential reform options. And so we'll talk about whether this is as much of an issue as some people think it is. If you ask a typical young person today about whether they think Social Security is going to be there for them when they retire, a very significant percentage, sometimes as much as half of people in some of the surveys say, no, I don't think that's going to be the case. But is this really this dire, right? And then Vardan will talk to us about the pension reform in Armenia, where he can tell you how that sausage was made, right? Sort of because he was in charge in sense of that factory. Okay, and so there is a few resources in here that we've listed from a variety of sources. Some of them are a little more conservative than others, so just keep that in mind. There is typically a bit of this challenge that you have to think about when looking at any source of information. But in general, Social Security is an important issue because it certainly is one of the largest, it's the largest social insurance program in the United States. There is 180 million workers who pay into the program, and there are currently about 70 million recipients. So you can kind of see from here that the ratio is roughly 2.5 to 1, right? But that ratio is getting worse. If you look at folks who are older than 65, nearly all of them, nearly 90% receive some benefits from the Social Security system. So this is a very wide retirement safety net. And you can also compare that to the US population, which is roughly 350 million people now, to get a sense of how large this program is and how extensive it is. And keep in mind that Social Security transfers account for roughly 25% of the federal budget. So that's a very significant chunk. And it's an equivalent of roughly 5% of the United States GDP. So hugely, hugely important. So this is a system that covers retired workers. And as you can see from this chart right here, that sort of accounts about 3/4 of the Social Security expenditure. It also covers spouses and children of retired workers in some cases. It also covers spouses and children of workers who died in a number of cases. And finally, it also covers disabled workers, their spouses, and their children. And you can kind of see from this table the magnitude of those, right? Disability benefits here account for about 10%. Retirement benefits account for roughly 71%. And then you can get a sense of what the supplemental security income, which is income for very, very poor folks, also contributes to that, right? So this is what we have. And with this, let me transition to Hadi's part of the presentation. And Hadi will talk about the idea of the Social Security as pay-as-you-go system. Hadi, the screen is yours.
All right. Hello, everyone. And here's my screen. I believe now you can see it.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. For this part of the discussion, I want to look at pensions and Social Security. And I'm going to be discussing very briefly pension systems, the way they're funded, the way they distribute the money, and my focus is going to be on the pay-as-you-go system. And for background reading for this part, there's a piece on the internet which I've linked here. So if you would like to read more, that's a nice place to start. Okay, now we have employees contribute investment returns, help fund the money that pension funds pay to the pensioners, and there's also government transfers that covers the deficits if especially if they're public insurance or public social security systems. The- that goes in, these are the things that go into the fund, and then the fund pays for retirement benefits, Medicare costs, healthcare costs, and also some administrative expenses and fees. And the problem that emerges by looking at this picture is somehow we should make sure that the money that goes into the system is not that different from the money that comes out of the system, so that the fund remains balanced and sustainable. And that's a key issue in discussing these plans and systems. The goal of pension systems is to provide insurance and make sure there's a minimum income for everyone who's a member of that social security or that pension plan. So that at the time of retirement, or if the worker exits from the labor market due to long-term disability, things like that, do not push people into poverty. That's essentially the idea. The, One can look at pension funds as an insurance contract where you get a stream of premiums coming to the fund or to the system, and then a stream of payouts for the various purposes, either it's income for the insured people or their medical costs, etc. And the premiums and payouts of the system depend on the circumstances. It may vary over time and across individuals. The another key issue in understanding Social Security and pension fund systems is to keep in mind that there are, if we all pay, for example, for our premiums and expect the insurer to come back and help us when we're in need, those contracts are infested with all sorts of problems, like information asymmetries, enforcement problems, and incomplete contracting, meaning that when you can't really specify all the circumstances. And this means that there are also behavioral issues that people may behave in ways that are not conducive to sufficient funds during the periods when they are in need, for example, due to retirement or due to loss of job or because of some long-term injury, etc. So those behavioral issues are also important, but my focus is going to be basically on the fact that there are some fundamental problems in private contracts for long-term insurance. The system may also not only provide insurance, but also provide some redistribution. And this is very important later on when we discuss the case of the US. The Social Security system does redistribute from the richer or middle class employee workers to low-income groups. Because of these considerations, redistribution and market failures, there's a need for regulation and government intervention. But the extent of these interventions could vary a lot across countries and across over time. Now, if I look at the pension systems on the funding side, you have two canonical forms of funding. One is pay as you go, which means that in each period, the insurer uses the premiums that they collect, and any fund that is carried from the past to pay the payouts that they need to make in order to fulfill their contracts. If there's a shortage of funds, the carried over and the current premiums are insufficient for taking care of the needs. The fund, the pay as you go fund needs to borrow money temporarily and then hope that later on they would be able to pay back. So if there's a deficit in a given period, insurer needs to borrow and deal with the problem in that period and amortize the loan with future surpluses. This system works well when the premium revenue grows faster than the pension payouts. But it's unsustainable when the rates of growth of premiums falls short of rates of growth of payouts. And that's a problem in many countries, especially developed countries that have very extensive social security systems. The payout is continuing to grow as people age. Especially right now, the baby boomers are creating a major demand for pension funds, and there are not enough people working relative to the number of recipients to make sure that the Social Security fund or the pension fund is balanced or ends up with a surplus. In the early years in the US, there was a surplus of funds, but as time has gone on and the demand has expanded, we see there are problems. There are larger and larger deficits, which are covered by the government in case of the US. Some people look at this and say, okay, this looks like a Ponzi game. Not quite, but there's a point there that essentially we're telling workers right now, pay into the fund, to the pension fund, and later on, if the economy grows and there are higher incomes, we would be able to pay your pension out of the money paid by the future generations. But since the government provides the guarantee in case of public pension funds, especially Social Security, the Ponzi game is not quite applicable, but it could be applied to some private pensions. So fully funded, the contrasting or the opposite of the pay-as-you-go is fully funded plans or systems. They invest the premiums that they receive and invest those revenues in the stock market or capital markets, and then offer payments out of the returns to their investments. Sometimes they may need to use some of their assets because of fluctuations, but typically, if in one year they pay more, later on they try to save more in order to continue operating. One can also have hybrid systems that combine pay-as-you-go with partial funding. And finally, the payment systems, how the payout is made. There are two canonical cases. One is defined benefit, and the other one is defined contribution. Defined benefit plans collect premium when the worker is employed, and they offer a stream of payouts after employment is finished, or whether it's because of retirement or because of exit from the labor market. But these payments are usually based on the final earnings of the individual, the person who receives the pensions. The defined contribution plans, however, link the payout to the amount of capital accumulated in a worker's account. And as the worker pays into the fund, they keep track of how much the person has contributed, and then they return that money to that individual based on some rule or some interest rate. The terms of the contract may be different in different countries, different situations, but that's the idea, that the return to that capital becomes essentially the fund that pays the payouts out of the pension system. This could be at the individual level, which is like individual retirement accounts, IRAs, or it could be at group level. For example, the workers in a particular company could be investing their pension funds in the capital markets and then use the proceeds to pay retirement or pension payments. The IRAs are a pure version of the defined contribution. Under defined benefit system, because the insurer commits to a certain amount of payment based on the salary or characteristics of the worker who retires or exits the market. The risk of how much is being paid versus the income of the fund is all passed on to the insurer. While under defined contribution, the individual or group of individuals bear the risk. All right, so that's basically what I wanted to say, to give you some background in terms of how pension systems work, how they're arranged. Now let's go back to Vlad and see what he wants to add to this. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a quick question. Sorry, I might have missed just now. Has our Social Security contributions been invested in one way or the other?
Say it again. I didn't hear properly.
I might have missed part of your discussion just now. I wonder if there is any investment done with the contributions of our Social Security money.
Right. Oh, yes. The fully funded version of the pensions, it actually takes the premiums, invests them, and then returns to that investment are used for paying the payouts, the stream of payments to the person insured, or the person who's receiving money out of the pension fund. This varies a lot. Some systems have start with an initial capital and returns to that, pays the pensioners, and that new premiums that come in get invested.
Right.
But some systems have a combination of the two. They have some funds and use that
Mm-hmm.
for payments, but
Mm-hmm.
the premium is also used for this purpose. This is
But
much
for
more common among, for example, state pensions. They usually have
the
a fund. They're not
right,
fully funded,
right.
but they depend both on the return to invest their own investment as well as the
Mm-hmm.
premiums that they receive.
But for our social securities, have they done like things like
Right.
that or
They have done it in the past when they had a surplus. They had bought
okay.
government bonds,
Mm-hmm.
which don't pay a whole lot of returns. And
Mhm.
they now I think this is going to be discussed in more detail when
Okay.
Vlad and Vardan.
Absolutely. And I'll talk more about this now. So, sort of folks
Mm-hmm.
have this idea of social security trust funds, because this is where the money is held, as this, piggy bank of sorts, right? That exists. But, think about it this way. So let's, consider a child, right? And the child is doing, all kinds of miscellaneous jobs, and sort of they're saving money and putting it in their piggy banks. And what the parents of the child do is that they take money out of the piggy bank while the kid is working, right? And they'll replace it by a little note that says "I owe you," right? And this is, in some sense, how it works in the United States. The Social Security trust funds are basically invested in government obligations, right? So this is essentially the money that, treasury that the United States government owes to the Social Security trust funds. If you look at this trust fund accounting, and I'll also
Mm.
talk a little bit more about this later. But meanwhile,
Okay.
Girika, I see your hand raised. Go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I was always curious on these terminologies called backdoor IRA and mega backdoor IRA,
Uh-huh.
mega backdoor Roth IRA. I was always kind of trying to understand, like, why do they not provide the direct way to invest money in the Roth IRA? Why, like, who came up and what is the idea behind this providing this backdoor route to put the money in the IRA? Well, ultimately the result is same, right?
Well, so I think this is like a bit of a technical concept, right? And the idea of the backdoor IRA, it's kind of like a way of funding your Roth IRA account when, based on your income limits, you're not eligible to do that. So we won't be able to talk much about it today, but the general explanation here, it's the political economy of those decisions when there are multiple groups that are basically looking for exceptions to the rules. And normally we call those things, those exceptions, loopholes and so on and so forth, right? Our tax code is complicated. There is significant number of exceptions and loopholes, right? Some of them will get closed over time. Some of them will get expanded over time. And every so often the tax code will get reformed, for example, like it was the case in 1970s. And my dissertation advisor and her husband, who was on the President's Council of Economic Advisors, actually worked on that reform. But let's save this question potentially for one of the future sessions. But you're right. I mean, there is a lot of things that are not necessarily efficient or equitable in the system. Okay. All right. Well, let me go back and I'll try to run through the rest of my presentation quickly, because Vardan is probably going to take about 20-25 minutes on his. And so I'll talk briefly about the program structure here. And so there is basically two components to the Social Security system, and these are the old age and survivors insurance and the disability insurance. And so in today's presentation, we're not really talking about Medicare or Medicaid programs, because this is a whole different ball of wax that we could probably do a separate session on. But generally speaking, the benefits that people earn are based on a number of things. They include your lifetime earnings adjusted for inflation. Essentially, Social Security looks at your 35 most productive years of contributions. And even if you worked for, say, 40 or 45 years before applying for Social Security, the calculation is still going to be based on the top 35 years of your employment, right? It will depend on retirement age. The current retirement age is about 67. It's been raised from 65 in the past. You can get you can get some benefits if you retire at 62, but these are going to be lower. So, it's adjusted for the fact that you're basically collecting your money for longer. It's also possible to delay your retirement until 70 and get a higher benefit. And so as people live longer, for a lot of them, it starts making more and more sense to actually wait until 70 to maximize their expected benefits from Social Security. This is also a progressive system in a sense that if you look at how the calculation is made for your primary insurance amount, the PIA, basically that calculation takes 90% of your first roughly 1,300 of average indexed monthly earnings. So if you were making about $1,300 per month, so if you are one of the poorest workers, then your Social Security payout is going to be pretty consistent with what you've earned while you were working, right? You're going to lose about 10% or so. But then once you go over that $1,286, then only 32% of the amount between this 1,300 and roughly 7,700 goes into your Social Security benefit. And then if you were making a lot more money than that, only 15% of the amount over $7,749 goes into that calculation, right? And so this is why there is a redistribution. Basically, there is a redistribution system that is built into this computation. Obviously, if you are, if you on average made more, your benefit is going to be higher, but it's not an increase on a one-to-one basis, right? The more you make, the more your Social Security benefit drops. And actually, the typical benefit tends to be around $2,000 per month, though it will vary quite a bit depending on your history of earnings. And so hopefully I addressed that previous question about this, right? About the progressive nature and the redistributive element of the Social Security element. Okay, so then if we go on to, oh, come on. All right. Why is it not? Okay, it's responding now. When we go to program financing, so the way how the program is financed, there is a payroll tax of roughly 12.4%. And that payroll tax is actually split evenly between the employee and the employer. So, your share of it is 6.2%, and the employer also pays 6.2% on your behalf. And of course, if you're self-employed, then you're both the employee and the employer at the same time, and the entire 12.4% is going to be paid by you. It's also applied to the earnings of up to $184,000 in 2026. This is known as the wage cap in everyday usage of this term. And so those contributions basically go to accounts that we call trust funds that the United States Treasury maintains, and these are essentially invested in Treasury securities. And so until 2021, we actually ran a surplus every year, right? And what a surplus means is that we collect more from workers than we pay in benefits, right? In 2021, the situation reversed. We are currently paying more in benefits than what we collect from the active workers under the pay-as-you-go system. And so the concern here is because trust funds pay out more than what they collect. Basically, the projection for the main trust fund that pays for the retirement benefits, this is going to be exhausted in 2032. However, it basically doesn't mean that come 2032, the whole system is bankrupt, right? It's just that once we exhaust the trust fund, right, the payroll taxes, and there is different computations in there. And so I'm giving you the range of those computations. they could cover as little as only 72% or maybe as much as 80% of the promised benefits, right? So there is some disagreement on those projections, but generally speaking, sort of like that date is coming up. 2032 is only 6 years away, right? That's a significant concern. And so, and then, sort of what we'll be forced to do in 2032 if nothing changes is that Social Security payments would have to be reduced, right? If you look at the Disability Insurance Trust Fund, actually the situation there is quite a bit better. The projection typically look at the next 75 years, and it's projected to last for at least 75 years until it's exhausted and until the reductions and benefits would have to be made if nothing changes. So you can kind of see that it's the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund where the problem is. And so, all right. Why is this not responding to my mouse? Sorry, this tends to be, for some reason, a common issue. Okay, and what are the pressures on Social Security that contributed to that? Well, it's obviously the rising life expectancy. If you look at 1930s, the life expectancy at birth used to be 59.7 on average, longer for women, shorter for men. If you look at 2023, it's up to 78.4. I mean, I'll say this. I mean, this statistic is probably at least a little bit misleading because this, if you look at 1930s, this 59.7 is, the life expectancy at birth. But given at the infant mortality, if you actually looked at individuals who reached the active adult life stage, obviously this expectancy would be much better once you pass that infancy consideration, right? So it might not be a perfect statistic, but it is at least somewhat illustrative, right? If you look at fertility, and fertility here, we're defining that in terms of the birth per woman, right? In 1960s, we've kind of hit the absolute peak in the United States during the baby boom era, where an average woman had 3.6 children. If you look at things in 2023, the statistic is much, much lower. It's roughly 1.62. And so the concern in here is that currently we've used for many years to pick up some of this in significant immigration, right? But the idea here is that if immigrants are not coming to this country, then the population of the United States is going to start shrinking, right? Another consideration here is the lower labor force participation rate. So it kind of was at its peak back in 2000 at 67%, and it actually gone down by about 5%. It's about 62% now, meaning if there is fewer workers working, then there is fewer workers supporting an increasing number of retired folks, right? There is the retirement of the baby boomer generation that contributed to the system, both in terms of, increasing the collection of premiums back in, back in 1990s, 2000, so on. But once baby boomers started retiring, this certainly creates a very, very significant pressure on Social Security. And then you can also say that another challenge is that if you look at Social Security in 1983, if you look at total wages paid in the country, about 90% of them were due to were basically subject to Social Security deductions, right? And this number actually is lower now. It was about 83% in 2023. And why does this happen? It's the income inequality, where if you are basically getting to the point where you're making more than $180,000 or $185,000, which is the cap now, right? Sort of the rest of this money would not be subject to the Social Security or to the payroll taxes, right? So these are the challenges that contribute to those pressures. So in terms of the policy reform options, there is a few choices available to us, right? And we gave you a number of websites that talk about various propositions, but generally those propositions could be grouped in a sort of couple of major streams, right? One of them is to increase the revenues. And so to increase the revenues, you will likely have to raise the payroll taxes, right? From the current 12.4% to something that could be higher, all right? You could raise or potentially eliminate wage gap. And so wage cap, right, which is currently at about $185,000, meaning more people will pay into the social security system. And actually, the hope there is that it would be, of course, great to reach the 90% that we used to have in 1983. Whether or not raising or eliminating wage cap is going to be doable legislatively, that's an open question, obviously, right? There are also proposals to increase participation, for example, by including state and municipal employees in there. And just to give you an example, I am an employee of the University of Illinois, which is a state institution, right? And so as a state employee, I actually don't participate in Social Security and I don't pay Social Security contributions on my earnings. The state has its own retirement system, right? And so there have been some criticism of this disparity where you have some of the state and municipal employees who have their own pensions, but who also have made some wages in their lifetime that were subject to Social Security withholdings, right? And so then they're getting a combined pension, and there is questions of fairness and the way to potentially adjust for the second stream of income. You could also decrease expenditures, right? Sort of that's another way to do that. And so we could modify the benefit formula to reduce the benefits. And this is probably not going to be a terribly popular option. Social Security reliably tends to be one of the most popular programs offered by the federal government. And so people generally don't like the idea of their Social Security pay being reduced. But you could also do something like, instead of saying, oh, look, we're going to just look at your 35 best working years, you could say, well, we're going to base it on the 40 years, right? And so if you haven't worked for the full 40 years, then based on that, your benefits would be reduced potentially, right? And of course, given that for many people, those years by default would have to be lower than the highest 35 working years that they've been charged, that already been included in the computation, it sort of leads to the reduction in benefits, right? You can also increase retirement age. And this was done before. Retirement age previously was changed from 65 years old to 67 years old. And there is potentially, sort of an option of saying, well, look, people are living longer lives. Maybe it's not 67 that we should be doing for the full retirement age. Maybe it should be more like 68, 69, 70 years of age, right? And then, of course, there could be more radical reform approaches that change our whole approach to retirement savings and create greater reliance on, private pensions, on market-driven pensions, right? And things like that. And so one of the examples of a relatively balanced policy reform proposal, you can look at it, at the link that I gave you to the Brookings Institution, right? So take a look at it if you have some time. And with this is what I wanted to talk about before I pass the baton on to Vardan. But if there is any questions, please ask questions now. Sonia, go ahead.
So just trying to understand, you said that we can increase the number of immigrants. So I'm trying to understand, if you increase the number of immigrants, they're going to work, they're going to contribute, but you're also going to pay them Social Security.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that also work?
That's true. That's a concern, right? And sort of, this concern comes from the point is, sort of if you change the immigration system to favor younger workers and workers with higher levels of achievement who will make more money, generally speaking, sort of due to the progressive element, that element of redistribution, that can actually make things better. On the other hand, if you're benefiting sort of the family-based immigration preferences, which was kind of the United States policy for a very long time, and if the immigrants that are coming to you are largely maybe parents or siblings of folks who came here, who became immigrants, right? Sort of that could have a negative impact. So there is a lot of detail in here that's going to be subject to the policy design in order to improve things. All right, anything else, folks?
No one has anything. I want to just It's a comment, but I've always thought about it, so I thought I'll bring it up. So somebody I knew and his relative died of stomach cancer, and the benefit that her son got was younger than 18 years old. And what I'm hearing, and I don't know if it's correct, is that he will actually for his entire life get $2,100. Does that sound right to you?
I can't comment on that. I don't think that it's necessarily for the entire life, but I don't know enough about the case and the way how that specific system works to be able to comment. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, that was surprising. I would understand 18 years or 25 years, but what I'm hearing
Yes.
is lifetime.
Yes, yes. Yeah, may not be correct, right? I'm a little skeptical that this would be the case for the entirety of the life cycle, but sort of I'd have to look into it in more detail. Okay, well, so it is 1:45, so we are running a little bit behind schedule, and so allow me to formally introduce Vardan Aramyan, who is the former Minister of Finance of the Republic of Armenia, a former Soviet republic. And Vardan, you were the prime minister in 2016, 2018. Is this correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
I was
wonderful.
the Minister of Finance.
You were in one of my classes and you were the prime minister. I didn't know that.
The
I
Minister
was
of
a
Finance.
minister. I was a minister and deputy prime minister.
Yeah, I remember you, but I didn't know I didn't know the prime minister part.
All right, Vardan,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let me share. Thank you, Vlad. Let me share and I quickly go over my slides. A few words about me. Just I launched my career in the central bank and reaching to the position of deputy head of a monetary policy department. And then I moved to the government, to the Minister of Finance, serving there as a deputy minister of finance, and then moved to the president office. I was the first chair of the first deputy of president administration, coordinating reforms in the economic sphere, and then was back to the minister of finance. So that's about me. And now I'm going to speak about what we reform, how we reformed our pension system. Exactly what Vlad and Haidar they talk about: defined benefit, defined contribution, pros and cons of this system, and few words about Armenia. I guess a few of you can know about Armenia. This is just a small country, but historically it was a part of the USSR and then become a sovereign country after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Currently, its a political system is a parliamentary democracy. Population is around 3 million and 10 million living abroad. We have a huge diaspora also in US and in Russia. And nominal GDP is around 30 billion and approximately $9.6 thousand GDP per capita. And country is quite advanced in terms of the human capital index. Here are some kind, I brought some important indicators like expenditures for the current health, which is in compliance with the world average. Literacy rate also is in a good shape. Life expectancy is around 77. In the US is 78, as Vlad said about it. How about the pension system? What we have inherited from USSR, it was an old-fashioned defined benefit system. I will explain why it is the old-fashioned, this pay-as-you-go system. But what was the pros? The weaknesses of the defined benefit system is that the current worker pays its share of tax and contribution. In some countries, what we have seen, the employer shares this payment. Anyhow, you got a promise as a return of what you now pay. It's just a black box. And then once you become eligible for a defined benefit system, then after the retirement, you are going to receive this benefit until the death. That's the most important part we need to bear into our mind. And another issue is that your benefits are based on a formula. And in a formula, some kind of aspects in a formula are politically debated, are set by after the political debates. For instance, in Armenia, we have a pension benefit which is equal to the basic pension, is a social type of the pension, plus year of service, how long you stayed in the labor market, and times the reference value, which again set by the government. In US, in elsewhere, in Latin America, we have seen other form of a defined benefit, which is salary. It can be last year's salary or the average 5 years previous 5 years salaries times year of service and the reference some kind of person. So suppose you have 100,000 per annum salary and you served 30 years, the reference percent is 2%, then you are going to get around 60,000 as a pension after your retirement. One important aspect of this defined benefit, in any case, there are some factors are determined after the political debates, and this creates some kind of vulnerability. If we go back to the history from where this pay-as-you-go comes, I don't know if you're familiar with Otto von Bismarck. This is a very famous gentleman in Germany, and he did a lot of reforms in Germany, and he's the one who introduced the DB system. But the year that he introduced it was 1889. And pay attention that during this time, usually people, they got retired when they reached the age of 70. Okay, and life expectancy at birth was around 38 to 40 years in Germany. So basically, even many people, they do not reach to the retirement age. And the fertility rate was 5 to 5.2 children in Germany during that time. Well, look to the tendency, what is going on in all around the world. And we examine many countries very carefully, all this demography. This demography is not going to be changed. This is the tendency in all around the world. The first one is the birth rate per woman. Vlad already talked about it. The dotted line is the world average. The data are from a World Bank, by the way. And if you look the birth rate in all around the world, it doesn't matter what continent you are looking at, Latin America, I don't know, Europe, Middle East, North Africa, whatever you are going, the birth rate goes down. Women, they don't want to have more children because child is a responsibility. There are a lot of debates around it, but let's keep this part. And life expectancy also is growing in the world, in everywhere. Okay. Now, if you look to the comparison of what was the system when Bismarck introduced this defined benefit and what is the current state, I want to draw your attention that currently the defined benefit system, those who paid for a defined benefit system after becoming retired, at least 15 to 20 years, they just consume whatever they create during their service, the time when they are in a labor market. In modern Europe, it is 50 to 20 years. In Armenia, it's 15 to 18 years. And this creates a major problem. It creates that what we have seen in many countries, defined benefit system is in a deficit. In Armenia, it was in a deficit. That's why in 2010 we brought it into and merged with the budget. CalPERS, for instance, in the US, also there's a big debate that CalPERS is also in a deficit. It's a Californian public, largest public pension in the US, so they all are in the deficit. Of course, there are some debates whether how you calculate future pensioners' current liability and compare to the assets. So, what kind of discounting factor you are taking in order to compare? But still, in many countries, what we have seen, defined benefit systems are in a deficit, and this is due to the demography, because the workers to pensioner ratio is declining dramatically. Okay, this is the tendency, and that's why we were thinking, we are tasked what we should do. if we wait until the gradual our system will be involved, then we are going to face with a problem that currently the whole Europe is in a big trouble. For instance, Professor Vlad talked about some kind of cures, some kind of measures, what you can do in order to improve this situation. And if you recalling Nicolas Sarkozy in 2012, he tried to do something. He tried to increase the average working age from 40 to 40.5, and also the retirement age from 65 to 67. And it cost the loss in the elections. That's why when I was in Brussels, there was a big discussion about the pension system, and my colleagues from European Commission, they were presenting the 2020 their strategy. I asked, look, guys, who is your political Jesus crisis in order to know who is going to take this big burden? And that's why now we thought to reform it and coupled with acknowledging and understanding that PEG system is not at the fair, it was not financial stability, demographic challenges are unstoppable, and of course in our system there was no linkage between the income and your pension that you are going to get. These are some kind of statistics, and I want to draw your attention to the left-hand side graph. These are projection what is going to happen in Armenia, and we have examined in many countries. These are also similar tendency based on the UN projections that in many countries, due to the aging population, due to the fertility rate that goes down, this kind of squeeze, the aging population is inevitable. Okay, and that's why the replacement ratio, which is the graph on the right-hand side, the upper one, these are just the historical what we have, and it's very important. Actual replacement ratio is an actual average pension divided to the average salary, and with DB system you cannot reach, let's say, appropriate at least 50%, for instance. You can see, and this tendency, what we had in Armenia, it was also in Latin America, in many Eastern European countries. Okay, so what we have learned from many countries, the experience, many countries, and Chile was a champion. They moved from this kind of solidarity-based pay-as-you-go system, just switching to the fair system, which is a defined contribution, and also making it a compulsory. This is what we tried to do in our case as well. So basically, this is the current system what we have. Pay-as-you-go system, the pillar 0 and pillar 1 are the defined benefit system that currently we have, and we added 2 additional defined contribution funded pensions. The second pillar was a mandatory. It means that for those who born after January 1st, 1974, they automatically, by law, they become members of this mandatory funded system. So philosophy behind it is that, look, you are young, you need to take care about yourselves. Just make a savings for yourself, and government is going to help you creating transparent and fully automated system, and also matching some kind of your contribution. But think about your future by yourself. And in the future, the system was designed in such that government is going to graduate from the first pillar. So after some 20 years, the first pillar is going to be abolished. So basically, government to take about the social aspects. Okay, and all employees, they need to take care about themselves, making contribution and saving enough to finance their pensions. And also we introduced the voluntary funding pension defined contribution system, which many employees currently are also using in addition to the second pillar. So what you are going to get when you got the age of the pension. So if you are if you work less than 10 years, then you are entitled only to have the basic pension, which is the pillar zero. It's funded from a budget. If you born before 1974 and has at least 10 years service, then you are going to get a pillar one, which is a pillar zero plus service year benefits. And if a person was born after 1974 and has at least 10 years of services and they receive uh, uh, defined labor, and so they become a member of the defined contribution cumulative pensions, they are going to to receive labor pension from a budget and also compulsory cumulative pension. Later on, as I said, this labor pension is going to be abolished once, for instance, currently, if a young lady become hired, she's going to be eligible only for a defined contribution. Government is not going to pay in the future as a defined benefit to her. Okay, these are just a philosophy. And our goal was that by 2050 to achieve a minimum average replacement ratio of 50%. By the way, Chile, what we have seen in Chile also when they introduced this system, their target was 49, and they currently they have a replacement ratio around 80%. That's to bear in the mind. Some conditions from where there it is going to be financed. So social tax is going to be the 10%, and it's a it's calculated before tax income, but it's paid after tax. So it's from your taxable income. Okay, and 5% is matched by the government. But the important aspect here is government is there is a cap for the government matching, 25,000 rand. Now, suppose this graph is a representation. Suppose that you got a salary of 500,000 drams, then 50% is paid by you and 50% is matched with contribution, I mean, by the government, 5%, 5%. But if you have a salary 2.1 million drams, then government's proportion is only 1.2%. The remaining around 8.9% you need to pay as a contribution to your personal amount, to your personal accounts. And here we also by law we provided different funds. The balance funds is the most risky. 50% is found when is a risky asset. The remaining is non-risky asset, and fixed income fund is invested only to the bonds fixed income, so it's a less risky. And if person didn't make any action, system automatically once you become employed and become a member of this compulsory system, system automatically by default it chooses for yourself the conservative fund, the average one, and one of the asset manager. We have two asset managers. Okay, and 40% of the pensions assets can be invested abroad. By law, we allowed only 60%, only 40% to be invested abroad. 60% should be invested in Armenia. Why? In order to these kind of long savings, to serve and to work for your own economy. That was the philosophy behind it. Okay, there was also one important aspect during this reform, mistrust of our society. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, many individuals, they lost a lot of money. Vlad knows about it. When my father, for instance, he has 100,000 rubles in a server saving accounts, and once early in the morning we get up and they say, state is not going to return this money. Okay, and then this kind of mistrust exists. That's why a lot of the debates was around these many political parties. They say, what if these asset managers are going to stole this money, or there will be some inflation will gobble up the real value. And that's why we introduced this direct guarantee scheme. And direct guarantee scheme, it guarantees the real value what you contribute, okay, adjusted with the inflation. Suppose today you contribute $10, and after 10 years, this $10 and the average inflation is 4%, and after 10 years, it becomes, let's say, $20 or whatever it is going to be. And once you got retired, and DSA identified and Federal Depository identified that you have a less value in your account than what was calculated by this scheme, then government is going to guarantee the difference between what you actually have in your account and what was calculated as a real value of your savings. But in a real life, we didn't see in any country where this kind of system when your contribution, because your contribution is just having a return on a compounding interest rate. That's why, in any case, even after the crisis, when in 2009 we have seen that many pension funds they lost the values of their savings, but after a while it was again adjusted backward. And this guarantee comes from two sources. 20%, it should be covered by the state budget, and we created our guarantee fund. Pension funds and asset managers are going to contribute to this guarantee fund. So 80% of this deficit should be covered by the guarantee fund. Some snapshots, also one of participants asked a question. We also introduced some important provisions. For instance, before reaching the statutory pension age, if a participant is officially recognized as having a disability of third or a higher grade, then he is eligible to go and to take whatever he accumulated. Or if a participant is diagnosed with a terminal or severe health conditions, for instance, some of vital organs are deemed incurable. Again, he is eligible to go and to ask whatever he accumulated to take this money and to take care of himself. If a participant continues to work after age 63, then without applying for a funded pension, government is going to stop its matching. There's also a provision about the inheritance. Suppose that a person dies before reaching the pension age or not fully use whatever he accumulated, all these funds is transferred to the heirs. And there are also some other important provision. And the last thing, I'm going a few minutes on this. We have seen many positive external, many positive also, let's say, outcomes when this compulsory system was introduced, mostly in the Latin America country. We have seen also already, we are feeling that this also happens in Armenia as well. One of my favorite is growth of long-term domestic savings. And if you compare two countries, one country with a lower saving rate and one country is a higher saving rate, you can see that there is a correlation with the higher saving rate is growing faster. Let's take it China. Okay, so now we have observed that before introduction of this system, our average growth rate was around 3.5 to 4%. Currently, our average growth rate was 4%. There are also other externalities, positive externalities, development of financial markets, creation of these are very important for a developing world. But because of a lack of time, I will stop here. And if there are questions, happy to answer them. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Vardan. This is fantastic presentation. Questions are coming in. Vitaly, go ahead.
Yeah, I have two questions. Well, first of all, thank you for the great presentation and sharing your experience. Question number one is like, how did Armenia avoid the itch of temporarily borrowing money from the new fund? Like what happened in Russia, there was this move to like the new fully funded system, and then there was like government managed fund and then a commercially managed fund. And then at the time of like economic trouble, they're like, oh, let us temporarily take money from this like big coffer of money. And then, oh, let's just abandon this system altogether. Right. And question number two, which is related, as far as I remember at the time, there was a huge mistrust in this change. First, people didn't trust the government. Like, hey, right now we feel security, right? Government has this kind of guarantee. And then who knows how it's going to happen. And then again, after losing savings overnight and so on, they didn't trust government much. But also they didn't trust the business people, right? Who's going to run those like private funds, because they remember that like widely publicized auto alliance for like people's car, right? And then it was a huge fraud scheme, and the organizers of the fraud didn't bear any consequences for like defrauding virtually everyone in the country, right? So how did Armenia manage to overcome these two problems?
Yeah, that's very good question, Vitaly. Very good questions, because the first question, political aspects, we have seen really in many countries, not in Russia, also in other countries, in the Asian countries, we have seen when there is a free money and there is a difficult situation in the country. By the way, we have also experienced such a situation in 2016. And fortunately, I was in a president office, and we blocked this kind of, well, let's say, the initiative from a government. But still, yes, this kind of risk exists. But what we did in 2017, we passed a new constitution, because all of this money, it is linked to your personal property. It is considered as a personal property of you. We created personalized accounts. So Vardan Aramyan holds a share in one fund, and I can see on a daily basis, on a transparent, of what is the value of my savings there, and it's my personal account. Okay, and it is protected by a property, by personal property legislation, and it is linked to the constitution, which is in a high priority. Nobody can, even government cannot make some kind of attacks to your personal property. Okay, this is just a link to the constitution. Of course, everything can happen in the world, but we try to secure as much as we can. Another important aspect, the second part of your question, is a transparency and trust. We enhance the transparency in the most higher level. As I say, it's a fully transparent. One important aspect, that all this money is a fund. It does not belong to the asset managers. Asset manager, they just manage it. This is the first. Second, we also create the provisions that asset managers should also put that skins in the game. So 1% over the net asset value, they need to contribute their own money in these funds and manage appropriately. Plus, asset managers, we invited AAA asset manager like Amundi. We negotiated with them, Amundi or C Quadrat, which is AA rated agent, one of the famous and biggest. And plus, there are also some very tough and stringent supervisory provision from a central bank. And also is by law. By law, we say where you can invest. For instance, asset managers cannot invest in African countries' assets or in a dangerous situation. So these are well stipulated in the law.
Thank you.
May I ask a question, Vardan? So in your
Yes, of course,
presentation, you mentioned that the fund managers were limited to a fee of no more than 1%. Do you have a sense of what the average fees are these days? Because, if you look at the United States, 1% would be a very high fee for a lot of automated investment, right? Where the fees could be a fraction of a percentage point. Do you have a sense of what they are on average in Armenia? Are they close to 1%? Are they kind of coming closer to zero, or what does it look like?
We negotiated 1%. By the way, Vlad, it was very tough negotiations, because many asset managers, they have all strong negotiating powers. Like we approach to the even BlackRock, everybody, and they launched that point from 10%. It was ridiculous. Then they say, 10%, we want over the net asset value. And we end up around 1.5%. Currently, it stays around 0.7% over the net. But still, we are thinking about to diminish it further because, the interest rates historically are going down. Still, our asset managers are doing well. I have one project in my head, Vlad. I want to may measure whether our asset managers are creating alpha for our pensioners based on a camp. And I'm gathering the statistics in order to run this regression analysis to identify. And then it is going to be another dimension of the debates with our asset manager, to what extent they're effectively managing pensioners' money, whether they are creating alpha, whether they have an appropriate investment strategy in order to create a beat the markets, let's say. Okay, these are the dimension, but still. Around just the summarizing is 0.7% over the now, and in the net terms, they last year they provide around 13% return on a savings. The previous year, from the launch, the average is 11%, which is normal return.
And that's 11% in nominal terms, right? Or is that in real?
Yes.
Nominal terms.
Yes.
And what's
Yes.
been the inflation in Armenia, roughly speaking?
Inflation, historically, Armenia is the best performer in inflation. Our inflation is around 3 to 4%, and even in some kind of cases, we have even lower. There, if we count from 1998, which is the stability, let's say, period when our economy began to stabilize, average inflation stays around 3%, including also some kind of inflationary shocks.
Thank
that
you.
we
Much
imported
appreciated.
also.
Folks, any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. Well, let me ask you one more question. So if you had to
Please.
change one thing and do one thing differently, sort of like thinking back to your experience with the system, what might you have done?
That's a very good question, Vlad. I think we need to be more aggressive in terms of the government contribution. 25,000 cap is still very generous, very generous. We need to adjust it back and lower it. Of course, it's not popular, but still it's a burden for a budget because you are not matching the contribution of your future pensioner, and still you have less money for current pensioners to pay and finance your current pensioners' money. This is the first one. The second one, perhaps I will introduce the automatic system of a life cycle funds. When if person do not make any action, just selecting, as I said, the system instead of a person, it selects the middle fund, and it selects one of the asset managers. But then over time, if you are passive managers, by law, there is a possibility to change the funds, to change the asset managers. There is a possibility electronically. You can do this, okay? But if you are a passive manager, perhaps it makes sense once you are younger to invest in a more aggressive portfolio. And once you become close to your retirement age, automatically this portfolio is adjusted and becomes less riskier, more proportional to the bonds, fixed assets.
And so this sounds like a great description of the power of default choices, right? If a lot of people sort of not financially savvy, have difficulty thinking about the future, which is our behavioral limitation, right? But basically the idea that they say is that if you're joining the system at the age of 20, your money goes to the most aggressive funds with the most opportunity for appreciation and income, right? And it will be automatically adjusted over time to match you, how close you are to retirement. and how much risk you should be willing to take.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that was one of the challenges that we are facing because the majority of Armenians, they were not so financially literal. That's why we created a system that instead, if they do not understand what is this, how it works, the system instead of you makes some kind of choices. But if you want to be more proactive in managing, then you can do the system also allows. Electronically, you can enter and manage your accounts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, folks, last call for questions. I know we are 20 minutes behind the scale, or we're stayed here 20 minutes longer. Go ahead.
I have a quick question. How is the consumer price index calculated in Armenia? There was a huge debate in this country 20 years ago about going to a chain method rather than the current the system, which usually is based on past weights of consumption of each item.
Yeah, Hadi, that's very good question. By the way, this it just reminds me my ages of serving in a central bank because such kind of debates in all around the world, how you calculate the inflation. We have a chain method of calculation, so it's not goes to the past in order to adjust the consumption because in a developing world your consumption is changing much more faster compared to the developed world. That's why we choose the
Very
chain
good.
method.
Very good. Thank you.
All right.
And maybe another quick one. So what if someone lives so long with all the advances in the longevity improvements and so on that they deplete completely this like saved portion of the fund? Will they get at least the government kind of sponsored minimum distribution?
Say again, do I understand correctly? You are just asking about a defined benefit system or defined contribution.
Yeah, like at the distribution time when people are getting pensions, right? Let's say they depleted completely all the accumulated savings,
Okay.
right? And then it's zero in it, but they keep living. So what do they do? Do they
Government, yeah, that's very good question. Government gives you social pension.
Okay.
And social pension, that's why the system is designed such then once you depleted the whole your savings, you become a socially vulnerable person. Okay. And then it's up to the government to take care of you.
Thank you.
Sonali, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not related to Armenia as such, but generally on the whole discussion, something in my mind was here, are we like trying to draw parallels with the way 401k is there today? But it's our money, and then you have Social Security, which is running in parallel. So in some ways, are we like trying to combine those where, you know, we do the contributions and there is a minimal contribution from government. So am I thinking right in that track? Like that's what was going on in my mind when I was listening to all this.
You are asking about what is the current system in Armenia, right? So now, combination of defined benefit and defined contribution. Our defined contribution system is very similar to 401 system, but with the difference that 401 is a voluntary. We have also a voluntary system, okay? So it's not by law that for sure with, let's say, in the age of let's say 18 and become employed, he has to save for his future. So 401 is a defined contribution system and a voluntary one. We have both. We have 401 voluntary and we have compulsory defined contribution. In addition to this, we have also defined benefit, which I already said it's something we have inherited because still we have a pensioners still there. You need to pay for their life. You cannot just shoot them all. This many maybe cynical, but you need to deal. It's a big problem. They serve for your money, so you need to take care of them as well. That's why we call our pension system, we called it multi-pillar. It has different pillars. And dependent which group you belong to, you can just got pensions from different sources.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it is 23 minutes past 2. So thank you very much, folks, for spending some extra time with us. Vardan, thank you. Hugely appreciate your participation in this discussion. We hope to have you back.
My pleasure.
And, folks, if there is any suggestions you have for future sessions, let us know. Heidi and I are thinking about potentially doing a session on the recent, AI manifesto, the impact of AI on macroeconomic performance, right? Sort of that might be one of the potential topics. If you have any other ideas, let us know. We are happy to adjust the content of the sessions based on what you folks would like us to talk about. Thank you again, and talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vardan.
Thank you.